So we're going to be your hosts for today's event. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the great staff here at the Convention Center for all of their hard work this morning. So thank you very much. Not to mention, and I don't know his name, but the wonderful music this morning. So, Tall Paul. Thank you very much. Today, over 1,400 businesses are turning plans into profits here in Tinley Park. With our tremendous business climate, we know that the Village of Tinley Park will be an effective partner in helping grow your business and new business that comes to our community. Thanks to the pro-business leadership of our mayor and board and the strategic planning of the ECC, Tinley Park is the first and still the only community in Illinois with the International Accreditation in Economic Development. Tinley Park stands as the model of economic development excellence with financial strength and business diversity that is unmatched in the Midwest. At this time, I'd like you to please join me in recognizing our elected leaders at Tinley Park that keep our community strong and progressive. Mayor Jacob Vandenberg. Clerk Kristen Therian. Trustee Cynthia Berg. Trustee Michael Glotz. Trustee Michael Panito. Trustee Brian Yonker. And Trustee Michael Mangin. Thank you. I now turn it over to Kurt.
He always puts a mic up. He's so tall. So, again, we want to thank you for coming today. Your Tinley Park Economic and Commercial Commission includes appointed local business leaders who study and recommend actions that will improve our business climate year after year. The commissioners review issues and make recommendations on real estate to maximize the real estate that's available in Tinley Park, finance and incentives, marketing, and business retention. Jay and I are very fortunate to work with these very wonderful people and these outstanding business leaders. So those that are here, please stand and remain standing when I call your name. Jim Moeller, if you're here. Dave Spiedel. Dennis Reedy. Chris Shoemaker. Dino Sanfilippo. Robert Workman. Yasser Alakiel. Edgar sorry, Edgar. And our Commission Secretary, Kathleen Congreve. Please, everybody. But we can't do our work without the wonderful village staff that puts in hours and hours of hard work. We have Dave Niemeyer, the village manager, is here. Paula Walrich, the community development director. Patrick Hoban, our new economic development manager. And the rest of the community development team and village staff makes our place function and make it a great place to work and live. So the business leaders and the prospects for business know that our economic development effort is a team effort, and whereby all of our village departments work together and we serve the needs of our business as best we can.
So every year we use this occasion to honor local businesses that have achieved milestone anniversaries. As I call your name, please come to the front, receive your plaque, and stay to have your picture taken with the mayor. We have two recipients for 50 years in business, the Tinley Park Park District. 50 years in business. Evans Trophy and Awards. Evans, sorry. "40 years in business, G.W. Berkheimer Company. "40 years in business, Lymander Building Services. "40 years in business, Tinley Park Quick Wash. "30 years in business, Bobby Noonan's Childcare. "30 years in business, Jim Fuentes Insurance Agency. No speeches, Jim. 30 years in business, LTL Hair Designers. "30 years in business, Terry's Installation. "30 years in business, Tinley Park Firestone. 30 years in business, Trident Dental Lab. And 30 years in business, New Way Disposal. "25 years in business, Centennial Lanes. 25 years in business, Dragon Palace. 25 years in business, El Famous Burrito. 25 years in business, Easy Recycling Corporation. 25 years in business, Little Joe's Restaurant and Pizza. 25 years in business, Nancy's Pizza Express. 25 years in business, Pine Cleaners. 25 years in business, TJ McCarthy and Associates. 25 years in business, Tinley Court. I'll come back to 25 years in business, Dragon Palace. Did I have it right, Dan? All right, come on up. "25 years in business, VIP Cleaners. And 25 years in business, Walgreens. Congratulations to each and every one of you.
And now we'd like to introduce a very special guest for the ECC breakfast this year. With us today is Deputy Governor Leslie Munger. If you may recall, in 2015, she was appointed Illinois Comptroller. She served a year and a half faithfully as an Illinois Comptroller. And after that, she's been appointed Deputy Governor by Bruce Rauner. And here she is. She's gracing us today, Leslie Munger.
Well, good morning, everyone. So happy to be here today. Thank you to Mayor Vandenberg, the Village Board, the Economic and Commercial Commission, and especially to your Economic Development Manager, Patrick Hoban, for inviting me here to speak to you today at this very important annual breakfast. Congratulations to all the Business Award winners who were just announced. Very happy to be here to celebrate with all of you. As some of you may not know, I is currently in my role as Deputy Governor. My job on behalf of the Governor Rauner is to help drive job and business creation in the state of Illinois. And it's one of the jobs that I really love doing because I spent my career in business. Long before I was ever involved in state government, I worked in brand marketing for a number of companies, Procter & Gamble. Most of my career was spent at Helene Curtis. I used to run the U.S. hair care business there and led brands that I know have been on the shelf for Walgreens and other companies as long as I can remember. Suave Shampoo, Finesse, Degree Antiperspirant, among others. So I come to my role in state government with really many more years in business, and I'm very pleased to be able to be here in this role and representing Governor Rauner to thank you all on behalf of the governor for all of your efforts to build businesses and to create jobs here in the Tinley Park area. So, you know, it's really, you have been a shining example of what can be done when your government works collaboratively with the economic development organizations to attract and bring businesses and to create jobs in your area. You've been a growth leader in the Chicago Southtown region. And a lot of groups have noticed that. You've consistently ranked in Bloomberg Business Week as America's best place to raise a family, and also at the top of Forbes' list for the best places to live in Illinois. So I just want to thank you and congratulate you for that wonderful effort. You have a lot to be proud of here. So one of the things I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you about today is how can we in the state of Illinois work with you to help you drive more of this success. We have a lot of things going on in the state right now to try and bring businesses and jobs back to the state and get our economy growing. The first thing I want to tell you about is an organization that was developed, a group that was developed really to help business retention. Those of you who have businesses here, we want you to want to stay here in Illinois, to expand and to grow and to deepen your roots here in our state. And so through a collaboration between the Department of Commerce and the Illinois Economic Development Association and two partners, private sector partners, ComEd and NICOR, we have launched a program called CORE. And CORE stands for Creating Opportunities Through Retention and Expansion. Now, the idea of CORE, it's a statewide economic development program. It's designed to engage employers and to really, again, help you stay here in your communities. So we started out talking to businesses all over the state. Our goal was to do 500 interviews throughout the state with businesses to identify what are your needs, what would you like to see from the state, and what can we do to help you. So far, we've conducted over 700 interviews, so we're exceeding our goals. We are learning a lot of great information, and our plan is to take all that information to try and synthesize it down to what the most important things are, and then to get going on working on those initiatives so that we can actually help you stay here, expand, grow, and be successful. So that's on the business retention side of the equation. But certainly the other side of the coin is business attraction. And certainly we've all read the newspapers and we see in the press that we have had a lot of outflow of businesses and jobs out of the state. So we are aggressively working to turn that around and to bring businesses back into the state. About a year ago, Governor Rauner and the team introduced a new group. It was called Intersect Illinois. It is the public-private partnership. It's funded solely by private dollars, but it works closely with the Department of Commerce to identify and recruit new businesses to Illinois. So it's really, I think about Intersect as the marketing and sales arm for the state, and the Department of Commerce is the one that actually reels it in and talks about what we can do in the state from a state standpoint and helps close the deal. We have had a lot going on with Intersect in the last year and actually had a lot of successes. You don't always hear about them in the paper, but we've been able to lock down, it was 8, and actually yesterday I learned they've added one more facility. Amazon is bringing 9 new facilities to the state of Illinois throughout the state, many kind of in this more central region, in the Joliet area and surrounding areas. So that is really great news for the state of Illinois. There's a company called Rivian that's a small electric startup company that has bought and taken over the old Mitsubishi plant in Normal, Illinois, that will be growing and building its presence there. We brought Vetter Pharmaceutical in from Germany, is opening its first North American manufacturing center here in Illinois in the Des Plaines area. And finally, just recently, in the last week or so, was the announcement of Flexingate expanding its facilities with a new facility just on the south side of Chicago, just a little bit north of here. So we have a lot of good news in the state, bringing jobs through our marketing efforts, and we intend to continue it. Last week, we announced that we are hiring a new CEO for Intersect. He begins June 15th. He is an economic development professional coming from Rochester, New York, where he actually really turned around that region after the loss of big companies like Kodak and Polaroid, a lot of the big corporate changes out there. So he's got a great resume and background, and we're looking for great things from him here in Illinois. His name is Mark Peterson. I'm sure he will be out here to meet with you when he gets on board. And simultaneously with that announcement, we announced the more than doubling of our board of directors to include business leaders from major companies throughout the state of Illinois. So the head of Northern Trust, the head of Abbott, Archer Daniels Midland, many leaders around the state, 10 new boards of directors. The new chairman of the board is Dave Casper, who's the CEO and president of BMO Harris. So I think it shows a very strong commitment on the part of the state of Illinois to our business community, that we understand that you need our help in the state, and that we're committed to work with you. Secondly, last October, the governor initiated another new project through an executive order, and it came about as a result of talking to businesses, both businesses we were trying to recruit and talking to current business owners about how difficult it is sometimes that the state makes it for businesses to operate through overregulation, through slow licensing times, through all the red tape that you have to navigate in order to do business in the state. So the project is called Cutting the Red Tape. And we've been working aggressively to identify all the regulations in the state, all the processes that slow things down, and to work to change them, get rid of some things, and really grease the skids for business development. I'm happy to say that we are on track to meet our first goal, which was to reduce the regulation burden in the state of Illinois on businesses by 25% by the end of the calendar year. We're on track to do that. We've identified a whole list of things, and we're working aggressively to get those done either through executive order and through the legislative processes to cut the red tape in Illinois for all of you. So those are just a couple of the things that we are doing in the state. And I'd just like to maybe throw the question out there again, is to ask you to help us know, let us know what we can do to further help you. You are a real beacon of hope here, and what we can do in the state with economic development and bringing jobs to the region. You sit ripe for a lot of the new businesses that we are working to bring in through Intersect because of your position here in Northeast Illinois, your close proximity to the intermodal facilities in Joliet and in Elwood, your direct access to the interstate system, your great proximity to areas, to our airports, Midway and O'Hare. And part of our effort is to not only look throughout the U.S., but also internationally, seeking foreign investment into the area. Again, airport access is critical to that. So you're perfectly positioned to take advantage of some of the things that we're doing in the state, and we'd like to work with you because we understand that businesses all throughout the state of Illinois are our partners in getting Illinois back on a strong track. Your growth is Illinois' growth. Your success is Illinois' success. So just thank you again for all you are doing. Congratulations to those of you who have been working so hard and honored here today to drive business and job growth in Illinois. We wish you a lot of success. We want to know what we can do to help you. God bless you all. Thank you.
Before I introduce our next guest, to piggyback on what Deputy Governor Munger was saying, you know, when I'm looking out here and you see what makes Tinley Park tick, you know, you see the collaboration that we have between a lot of organizations we have here. I mean, you have the representation from the Tinley Park Chamber. You have Andrew High School Principal Bob Nolting. I thought I saw Teresa Nolan here somewhere. You know, you have the police chief, you have the park district. Everybody works together, the families, the businesses, to make Tinley Park what it is. And if there's one person I'd like to recognize, John Curran, who is, I believe, going to be retiring very soon. Thank you for all your work in Tinley Park, so thank you very much. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Patrick Hoban. Patrick is the Village of Tinley Park's new Economic Development Manager. He's been practicing economic development for the past 10 years and is an IEDC Certified Economic Developer. He also holds the Economic Development Financial Professional designation from the National Development Council. I think that's the most I've ever said development in one sentence. Please welcome Mr. Patrick Hoban.
Good morning, Tinley Park. I am very excited to be here and very excited to be your Economic Development Manager. As Jay said, I was doing economic development for 10 years. It seems to be about every 10 years economic developers make a change. My wife and I were looking at actually getting out of Illinois, going down to Florida, California, Texas, different areas, but then we got a phone call from Tinley Park, and we knew Tinley Park because we come here to watch concerts. We're big concert buffs. Also, we're Bears fans, and we love Notre Dame. So you guys are right at the crossroads, and I said, this place has got something. And so I started doing a little bit more research. When it comes to economic development, it's all about developing the scarce resources. And the number one scarce resource is the people. It's you guys. It's the businesses in this room. When I started diving closer, that's what I'm going to talk about today when we're looking at our demographics on who Tinley Park is. Population-wise, if you look around the state of Illinois, there's actually a decline in a lot of the population. Tinley Park is holding steady. That is a great thing for this area. Whenever we're out trying to pitch our area on trying to bring businesses here and to get you to expand, this is exactly what we need to see. Growth-wise, it really depends on what we're looking at here, but growth income, median household income is projected to go up. Same thing with the median home value is projected to go up, but also age is projected to go up. Diving a little bit closer into the age bracket, this is something Rick Mattoon and I were discussing before. It's kind of hard to see your slides. I didn't set this up. 0 to 14 is actually on the way down. Same thing with 15 to 24. That is a concern. I'm not sure if that's my generation, Gen X, not having the families that we're supposed to be having, or if those 24-year-olds are actually leaving. 25 to 34, holding steady, 35, 44 on the way up. But then there's a decline from the 45 to 54, and then you can see some increases towards the end, 65 to 74, 75 to 84. So you can see our median age is actually going up. And depending on what your business is, you know, that's going to determine. But the main thing for what we do is the workforce. Labor force-wise, you can see that Tinley Park has held pretty steady, but you've seen an increase in your employment and then a decrease in unemployment. That is awesome. One thing that people don't know, though, is that your unemployment rates are measured by where you live, not where you work. So Tinley Park, as you can see, has about 25,000 people that leave Tinley Park every single day to work. We have about 3,000 people that actually live and work in Tinley, but then we have 17,000 that come in every single day to work. So what does that mean? Well, it really depends on the businesses that we have. The biggest one, though, is retail. We have 4,000 people that work in retail in Tinley Park. The top line on this graph is going to be what the actual sales are, the supply. The bottom line is the demand. So if you see any gap in between there, that is a surplus for Tinley Park. Auto sales, that is phenomenal. That is a huge number there. You're over $300 million a year in sales compared to the actual demand of $200 million. After that, general merchandise stores, and then food service. However, you'll see an opportunity where the demand is higher than the actual sales themselves when it comes to food and beverage stores. That's why you're getting new grocery stores. Woodman's will hopefully be opening pretty soon. That's why that demand is there. We have an entire list back at the office of what other opportunities exist. So if anyone is out there, developers that are in the room, let us know. There's plenty more opportunity to expand. And these are the actual jobs that are in Tinley. As you can see, the number one employer is retail, followed by food services. Retail is very difficult right now. You'll notice every month or two, somebody else is closing. So, I mean, I know that we're a mecca for retail, but we'd like to really diversify more on the educational side, manufacturing, finance, construction, distribution, trying to piggyback off of what John Gruling's doing down in Will County. The logistics boom is huge, and it is here to stay. We can really benefit from that when it comes to the hotel game as well, because they need somewhere to stay. Vacancy-wise, as I was just talking about retail, you can see that spike that came up there. You can tell that that's probably coming from Kmart. We're working very hard with the ECC to come up with new ideas to fill these positions, or to fill these spaces, or to repurpose them to something else. Office is on the way down, industrial is on the way down. And you can see that that vacancy rate in industrial is exactly why Hillwood just committed to building a 300,000 new square foot spec building over by M Block. Like I said, distribution is on the way. And as Jay said, you know, it's all about teamwork. Economic development is nothing more than information and relationships. It's going to take all of us in this room, and we're looking for leads. From those leads, we're going to set up meetings. We're going to track the inquiries that follow. We'll end up going after the prospects. Whenever I walked in the door, they handed me 80 of them, 80 prospects, and it was like drinking from a fire hose. Some of those already came out. You heard about Bang and Gavel Brewery. M Block was another one, the renewal of that. But I mean, it's great to see so much already happening, but we need more. We're hungry for more. We're going to track the meetings, we'll track the inquiries, we'll track the prospects, and we're going to get back to you the investment and the amount of building permits. So going forward next year, this is going to be the baseline, and we're going to see a lot of progress, and we need all your help for these leads. So if anybody has any ideas for businesses, I know I emailed invitations to every single one of you, so let's set up coffee sometime or lunch or adult beverages, and we'll talk about how we can develop Tinley. Thank you.
And now I get the biggest honor of all. I get to introduce our new mayor, Jake Vandenberg. Jake Vandenberg was elected as Tinley Park's 26th mayor on April 2017 after serving 2 years as village trustee, where he oversaw planning and zoning and the Planning and Zoning Committee. Mayor Vandenberg is a lifelong resident of Tinley Park and a graduate of both St. George and Providence Catholic High Schools. He resides in Tinley Park with his wife, Carrie, and sons Oliver and Logan. He and his family are parishioners of St. Stephen Deacon and Martyr Church. Mayor Vandenberg is also Chief Executive Officer and a four-generation funeral director at Vandenberg Funeral Home, a family-owned small business with locations in both Tinley Park and Mokina. So please, everybody, let's welcome Mayor Jake Vandenberg.
Good morning. Let's get rid of this. Alrighty, before I dive into my remarks, I'd like to first thank you, Deputy Governor Munger, for coming out and speaking to the congregation today. It's a dear honor to have you here, so thank you very much. And then it was already mentioned, but my colleagues, Brian Yonker is in the back. He came in late, so Brian, thanks for waking up and coming this morning and joining us. Also, Mike Mangan, our newest trustee. Mike's gotten right to work and working with the finance department. He's got a lot going on there, and we appreciate you diving in and getting right to work. And then last but not least, Bill Brady. Bill's the fossil on our board, and today I say that meaningfully because it's his birthday. So congratulations, happy birthday, Bill. All the best to you and your family. So the icebreaker before a speech, it's always typically a joke or a quote. I'm going to do both. So Pat set the table for me. Thank you, Pat. The median age increase over Tinley Park in the next 20 years was inclining. That's not going to be bad for the 5 funeral homes in Tinley Park. So thank you very much. I hope that you stay here in Tinley. Fellow business owners, thank you for the opportunity to be here in front of you this morning. Thomas Jefferson said, "I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past." The future is bright for Tinley Park. But in order to understand where we are going, we do have to understand a little bit about where we've been. The founders of our community had a vision of what our community could be. When the Rock Island Rail Line was built in the late 1900s, our forefathers capitalized on the opportunity and made sure our community was ready for the future growth. And as the rail continued to expand, so did Tinley Park. Our past leaders laid out fiscal, economic, and development policies that led to the continuation of success. Today, we look forward to building on this foundation with best practices from both the public and private arena. Some successes of economic development here in Tinley Park include entrepreneurs such as the Bing & Gallo Brewery, large companies like M Block that distributes the Keurig products we enjoy every morning, and employee-owned companies such as Woodman's. That is, as Pat mentioned, our newest grocery store prospect. This is not to say we do not have some challenges to overcome here in this wonderful town of Tinley Park. Cook County has much higher taxes than the surrounding counties, which makes it difficult to attract new businesses and their opportunities. The state of Illinois is broke. Sorry, Leslie. And cannot do much to help the communities grow. Our state is broke and broken, and looking to Springfield for help is not a good use of our time or resources right now. So we're pretty much on our own. But despite these challenges, we do have some assets that make Tinley Park a great place for business to locate. Part of our community is in Will County, and currently Will County is experiencing a logistics boom thanks to Amazon and the intermodals and the railroad expansions. This expansion has set Tinley Park up as a prime location for more restaurants, more hotels. As Amazon and other online retailers continue to grow, the need to repurpose retail space, which is becoming more apparent. Our Economic Commercial Commission will continue to research the best practices to make recommendations to retail's turbulent industry. The growth in logistics in Will County also makes it imperative that we do more to invest in the infrastructure. Investing in infrastructure is one way that the village can help current business owners, and it can serve as a catalyst to recruiting new businesses. We have plans to work with Cook County in repaving 175th Street, finally, and to expand 191st Street in preparation for the new Woodman's Grocery, as well as ease the traffic burdens for the amphitheater. We are also looking to work with Will County in widening 80th Avenue to 191st Street to 4 lanes, which will better accommodate our industrial land there, as well as our residents in Will County. Additionally, we are looking to expand Tinley Park's broadband options. Improvements to our roads and other infrastructure projects will help us better recruit new businesses to our community. After the infrastructure, brownfield development is the easiest way to spur economic development, especially in a brownfield with the size and visibility as the mental health center. We want to work with you to identify the best uses for the abandoned mental health center. This is a challenge we have to resolve, and soon, another way we are competing in surrounding communities in Indiana is by opting out of Cook County minimum wage and the paid sick leave policy. We recently analyzed our comprehensive building codes, quickly realizing that we can enact a new code that would allow for realistic development in Tinley Park. This was a great accomplishment that the board took over about a year ago, so congratulations to the board on that. This will help ensure our community does not lose out to the surrounding communities and other counties. Friends, these are only a few small initiatives that the board has put forth to help alleviate difficult business environments. But we could do more. Upon taking office, I made a declaration to the village staff. We want to see an absolute culture change. By that, we want builders, developers, residents to walk into Village Hall with their dreams intact and walk out with a smile. knowing that the staff will assist them with fulfilling their vision. In the coming months, I, along with the Board of Trustees and the village staff, will begin creating a new small business development and redevelopment plan. This plan will be thoughtful, economical, and most importantly, successful. We also have reorganized our planning, building, and economic development departments and hired new staff with new ideas to better serve the needs of the village business community. The village recognizes the importance of working with local businesses, which is why our hosts, the Economic Commercial Commission, has been reviewing our incentive policy to accommodate the needs of the business community. The work being done behind the scenes has seen some success. One area where we have seen some growth has been our downtown area. Primal Cut has created a buzz with its unique dining experience and its delicious signature cocktails. Anticipation builds for the Banging Gavel Brewery and the preservation and rehabilitation project of the Tinley Park landmark, which they are going to be doing business in. Showcasing the craft movement with its award-winning microbrews and its outdoor beer garden. And there are more development projects in the works. In the coming weeks, the village is looking to be even more aggressive in making sure our available sites are being shown. The village is working to set up open houses in our available sites to gather and discuss ideas for this, to gather and discuss ideas for these sites. We will be looking to you, the members of the business community, to tell us the kinds of economic development ideas that we should try in these locations. We will also be coming to the businesses for insight with revitalized business retention and expansion programs. This will be your opportunity to tell the village how we can help you be successful. All feedback will remain confidential and only disseminated in an aggregate form. And as always, we appreciate feedback at our village board meetings, on websites, social media, and better yet, our commissions and committees. We are always looking for new volunteers to join these different commissions and committees. These are actually what drive a lot of the business here in Tinley. So please, if you have some time, I know you're all busy business owners, we ask that you please join us together to help move this forward. It is time to capitalize on the opportunities that are in front of us. Our village can't succeed unless you succeed. I believe in this community, and I believe we do have a bright future. The former Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, said, "We cannot build a vital economy by delivering pizzas to one another." It's time for a new, fresh approach and a bold vision for our community, and that is why I hope to bring Tinley Park. As Thomas Jefferson said, let's think about the future rather than dwelling on the past and work together to move our community forward. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for doing business in Tinley Park. Here's to all your continued success. I wish you all the best. Good luck on the next year. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Mayor Vandenberg. Our next speaker, Rick Mattoon, is a senior economist and economic advisor in the Economic Research Department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Mr. Mattoon's primary research focuses on issues that face the Midwest regional economy. Mr. Mattoon began his career at the Chicago Fed in 1990. He also served as a policy advisor for economic development, energy, and telecommunications to the Governor of Washington, and Director of Policy and Legislation for the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. Educated at Kenyon College and the University of Chicago, Rick Mattoon serves on the board of the Chicago Manufacturing Renaissance Council, the Advisory Committee to the Chicago Workforce Investment Council, the Pension Committee of the Civic Federation, and is a member of the Joint Advisory Board of Economists to the Governor of Virginia. He also serves as a lecturer at the Kellogg School of Management and at Northwestern University. So please help me welcome, as we are fortunate to have, Rick Mattoon.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I also agree with the mayor. I always like to start with a joke because as you can probably tell, I've been doing these presentations long enough that I've realized that that's going to be the high point of my presentation for almost all of you. So this is old chestnut in the economic profession, which is you should always remember the person pretty much decides to become an economist when they realize they don't have quite enough personality to be either an accountant or an actuary. That being said, that's about what economist presentations are usually like. Today I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to talk about the condition of the U.S. economy, sort of what's different about the current recovery we've been going through and sort of what the headwinds have been, then put Illinois and Illinois' municipalities in that context. So the first thing I want to start out with is some themes for 2017. One of the big debates that economists had coming out of this last recession was whether or not the U.S. economy was going to what was being referred to as a new normal. And this new normal suggested that the U.S. economy was going to sort of permanently downshift, at least for, say, the next decade, to a slower 2% rate of growth going forward. And the debate over this was whether or not what we had seen coming into this recession was normal economic conditions, or was it something that was fueled mostly by a real estate bubble. And the expectation really coming out of this is that, yes, most of that higher rate of growth was really being fueled by debt. And now what we're doing is we're shifting down to a rate of growth which at 2% is more sustainable, but obviously not as exciting as we've seen in the past. Now, the big question most people have is why is the economy is so hard to get growing faster. And there's a lot of structural reasons really for why that's the case. The first, very interestingly, goes to the demographic picture that was being shown for Tinley Park. And the good news for Tinley Park is you're just like the rest of the nation. The bad news is you're just like the rest of the nation. The problem is the prime working age population is shrinking relative to the rest of the population in the U.S. And so as this population shrinks, it suggests that there are going to be fewer taxpayers relative to what the entire population is, fewer people in their prime earning years. It's going to make it more difficult to get productivity growth when you simply have fewer workers in the economy relative to the rest of the population. Perhaps the biggest concern that economists have really focused on is productivity. Productivity has been in a significant rut in the U.S. economy really for the last 5 years. We've had virtually negligible productivity growth. And why economists worry about this is because productivity is really kind of like the speed limit for growth. You can't get faster growth without higher productivity. And one of the issues that's really happened is one of the ways productivity often occurs is through some sort of a technology shock. Something gets introduced into the economy that allows workers to be far more productive. And the last time this occurred was the IT revolution. So information technology came in and you had a huge boom in the U.S. economy. The problem is the technology revolution, the IT revolution, in many ways has sort of played itself out at this point. So what you get are sort of marginal gains through improvements in information technology being deployed. And because of that, it's harder for businesses to grow as aggressively because they've already used all the most advanced systems for managing inventory or for being able to track their records or do all these other sorts of things. So it's harder to get the kind of growth you would have had in the past. So absent some sort of a new technology shock, it's hard to come up with a case where productivity, given this, again, unfavorable demographics and this lack of technological innovation, gets you on a faster growth path. Now, it's always possible that we could have a technology shock. Economists are phenomenally bad at predicting these sorts of things. But if you have that, then you could move up this sort of faster growth curve. The other thing that has happened is we've really peaked out in terms of the boost we've gotten from higher education attainment. If you look at demographics, the college-age population is now declining relative to previous cohorts. And what you're seeing is essentially college attainment levels have pretty much plateaued. So you're not getting that gain that you used to get in the past simply for more people going to college. And all these are really structural factors. I mean, these are things that are going to serve as a bit of a headwind on the U.S. economic growth going forward. And of course, the issue that economists are also grappling with right now is whether or not a countervailing force is going to have some effect on these structural issues. And that essentially is much more robust fiscal policy going forward. The current administration has made it quite clear that one of their goals is to have a much more aggressive fiscal stance than the previous administration has had. And the issue is how are these two things going to play out? So what's going to be the ability to sort of try to goose the economy through sort of these more expansionary fiscal policies versus this structural slowdown that's occurring in the economy. The other thing that isn't also going to change dramatically, which is also going to weigh on growth, is sort of slow world economic growth at this point. Whether it's Europe, whether it's Asia, particularly China, which is going through a decelerating growth cycle at this point, it's harder and harder to see how even foreign markets necessarily would bail us out in terms of growth going forward. So what's not going to change from 2016? One thing that's not going to change is the employment situation. Employment gains have been extremely steady over this most recent recovery. We're still averaging somewhere around 160,000 net new jobs per month. The expectation is that will continue. The unemployment rate will continue to stay very low. In fact, almost hitting a sort of full employment level as far as at least the Federal Reserve is concerned. Again, the rest of the world economy is not going to grow very quickly. And consumers are really going to be the key, again, to any sort of marginally faster growth in the economy this year. One of the things that's really puzzled economists is that consumer sentiment is running at sort of all-time highs. Consumers are extremely optimistic about their own condition at this point, but it hasn't really translated into retail sales. What you've seen is very slow retail sale performance, even in this environment. And so one of the things that has happened is economists have continued to say is as wages rise, as consumers feel confident, they'll go out and they'll spend more aggressively. And this boost in consumer sales could have a real sort of effect on the economy, boosting growth by several points in terms of that, several percentage points. So that could be a good news story there. The other thing is U.S. household wealth continues to hit records. We're about $94 trillion right now in U.S. household wealth. That being said, it's extremely unevenly distributed. Basically, household wealth was mostly restored for people who own stocks over this period of time. If you owned assets, your household wealth came back. If you didn't own assets, you were probably not a whole lot better off than you were before the recession happened. And so this all leads to this question of how do all these things play into Fed policy? And one of the things the Fed has made clear is our goal is to try to normalize the Fed funds rate. And a normalized Fed funds rate essentially is defined as a rate that would be neither expansionary nor contractionary, sort of a neutral stance on Fed policy, would be somewhere around 2.9 to 3%. We're currently running at 0.75 to 1. So that suggests that there's a lot of room to run before we get up to that sort of normalized rate. And it suggests a significant number of interest rate hikes coming down the pike. The big question is going to be what's going to trigger those interest rate hikes and what the timing is going to be for them, but not that the Fed's goal is not to eventually get to this more normalized policy stance. Okay, so let's talk about the big wild card, which is fiscal policy. This is just some thoughts at this point, because one of the problems right now with a lot of the fiscal policy proposals is that you have broad strokes as to what they represent, but it's unclear as to how they would be implemented or exactly what the actual sort of structure of them would be. The first thing is this fiscal expansion could take many forms. It could take tax cuts. It could be infrastructure spending. It could be a rise in defense spending. All those would be expanding sort of the expenditure in the fiscal side of the house. The big issues to consider, at least for economists, are a couple. The first is how are you going to pay for this? If this fiscal expansion is paid for primarily by debt, that's not going to be good in the long run. Essentially, you have to pay for this somewhat upfront. So unless you're going to reduce government expenditures to offset tax cuts, unless you're going to do some of these other things, you may have a short-term gain in terms of economic growth, but it won't be sustainable because, again, you're going to be essentially financing this through debt. The other issue that economists really focus on is, and this is sort of like public finance 101, is strong fiscal policy tends to work best when there's two conditions in the economy. The first is high unemployment, and the second is a lot of slack resources. Because in both cases, the fiscal policy comes in and soaks up that behavior. The problem is right now is we have neither of those conditions. We have very tight unemployment at this point, and if you believe the Congressional Budget Office at this point, the output gap, which is this measure of slack resources in the economy, essentially will be closed by this summer, suggesting that the U.S. economy really doesn't have a lot of extra output available to it. The issue is then if you inject strong fiscal policy into that environment, what you wind up getting is inflation mostly. Because what will happen is simply people will be chasing, employees, bidding up wages, bidding up resources that aren't really available, and this is going to add a lot of costs rather than necessarily get you the kind of growth that you expected. We're hearing this anecdotally when we talk to a lot of manufacturers through the region who simply say at this point they can't get employees. I mean, at this point, the only way they can get employees is by paying increasingly higher wages or trying to steal them from their competitors. So they said if there was a lot of additional business coming in, they don't know how they would meet it at this point. So that's an issue to consider going forward. The other thing is timing. Almost all these actions require legislative action. And so you're still going to have to look at a congressional budget process. You're still going to have to look at approvals down the line. Many of these could end up being, telescoped out in terms of when the actual approvals or when these actual policies might take place. And that's always going to have an issue in terms of that. And then the other final issue is whenever you have this kind of change, there's always a lot of unintended consequences. And, when I talk to municipalities, one of the things I point out is, there's some of these which have consequences for your ability to issue debt and the cost at which you would issue debt. If you bring down marginal tax rates for high-income earners, they're among a large class of owners of public debt. The problem is it's going to be less attractive for them to hold tax-free debt if their marginal rate is decreased. Similarly, there's been discussion of actually eliminating tax preferencing for state and local bonds, in which case, again, you would increase the cost of issuing going forward. So those could be unintended consequences. So let's look at a couple of pictures just to show you where conditions are right now. So the first is if you look at employment. Again, we've had this nice steady climb from the bottom of this recession. As you can see, we've more than recovered considerably the number of jobs that were lost during the recession. And unemployment has continued to improve, and we're at about 4.4% rate. However, that is sort of the headline number for unemployment. If you look at sort of a broader measure of unemployment, it suggests that there's still some room for improvement in underlying labor conditions. So the second slide shows you what's referred to as the U6 versus the sort of traditional unemployment number. The U6 is people who are working part-time or are less than fully employed. And as you can see, it's still elevated at 8.6%. Now, as you can see, it's come down significantly from the over 17% rate it was at the top of the recession, but it's still not at the sort of 7.5% rate that it was before we went into this. And that suggests there's still room for improvement in terms of the quality of jobs that are being added in the labor market right now. So again, some more room in terms of that. A key issue that's happened in terms of setting a stage for sort of more sustained recovery also has been the sort of the deleveraging of debt within the U.S. economy. So what this figure shows you is households' debt as a percentage of disposable income. As you can see, it's pretty well stabilized at about 10% after being extremely elevated again due to this real estate bubble, which we went into the recession and really was a trigger for the recession. The good news is when you deleverage, essentially you've rebuilt all the balance sheets, and so you're in a better position to support growth going forward. So we think that's a good news measure. The other thing that we think is extremely key has been the recent growth in wages. Throughout the period of this recovery, we had very sluggish wage growth. Basically, it was pretty hard for most of the years up until 2014 to get wage growth of better than 2%. We're now running at about 3.4% according to this figure that the Atlanta Fed puts out. And that suggests, again, this is sort of more meaningful wages. This will make people feel better about their conditions and, again, may have a better impact in terms of consumer spending going forward. So we think that's also a good news measure. Okay, so that all leads us to what we think the current forecast is. Well, the last FOMC meeting was that we released a public forecast. There's one coming up in June where we'll do a revised forecast, but the last one we did our public forecast was the March 2017 meeting. And at that point, as you can see, the central projection for the members of the FOMC was for growth in 2017 of 2 to 2.2%. Again, basically in line with where we've been for the last several years. Again, the Fed basically agrees with most of the Congressional Budget Office and many other economists at this point that long long-run growth for the U.S. economy is right now in the 1.8 to 2% range. So even at 2.2%, that's slightly above trend growth at this point. If you look at 2018, a little bit wider of a range, but potential for going to 2.3%. But again, nowhere near that sort of 3% figure that many people have been hoping for. Inflation is nearing the Fed's target at 2%. The expectation is that we'd like to see it running at 2% at least for a period of time. We think that would help with economic growth at this point. It's underperformed consistently coming out of this recession. We've had very little inflation, and we'd like to see that inflationary curve sort of pick up some. And we have some hope that will occur this year. As you can see, we get closer and closer to sort of meeting what our mandated target is. If you look at unemployment, not a whole lot of room for improvement there. Again, if you look at long run at this point, we think we're actually operating below long run, so we're actually in a very tight labor market in terms of that. And again, Fed policy, the expectation among at least market watchers is the Fed will do 2 more interest rate hikes this year. But again, the issue is going to be the timing of those rate hikes. You know, what would trigger that? Would it be, again, continued strength in the labor market? Would it be sort of indications that inflation is picking up? You know, what would be the behavioral things that would cause the Fed to make those sorts of changes in terms of that? So now I'd like to turn to Illinois, and Illinois in this context. So if you're not depressed yet, now comes the depressing part of the talk, okay? So the first thing for Illinois is the state's been consistent. We underperformed the U.S. region during the last recession, and we've underperformed during the recovery. So at least we're on a solid trend. The unemployment rate has been consistently higher, and job growth has been consistently slower. This is also true relative to many of our other regional counterparts. Geography of the recovery has been incredibly uneven. 90% of all the jobs that have been added since the recession have occurred in metropolitan Chicago. Virtually very little growth has occurred really in downstate at this point. And you know, much of this is because other parts of the state, which originally had somewhat of a surge coming out of this recession, have now been hurt by the current economic cycle. Ag did phenomenally well up until the last 3 years. In fact, during a period of time in like 2013 and 2014, many ag counties actually had the highest per capita income of any counties in the United States because farms were making so much money. The problem is now is that cycle is completely turned against ag. It's not because of crop production. Crop production continues to be extraordinary. And frankly, farmers are a victim of their own productivity. They continue to produce more crop. That continues to drive down prices. And as prices have collapsed, essentially that's obviously had an extreme effect on farm income. So that's had a real effect on any sort of rural communities at this point. The other thing has been the manufacturing recovery. Illinois benefit less from the manufacturing recovery than other states, mostly because we don't have as much auto exposure. The manufacturing that was dominant for us was actually the manufacturing that didn't perform particularly well over the last several years, mostly Caterpillar or John Deere. And those where if you were auto or auto supply related, you did really well over this cycle because, again, autos were doing very, very well. So if you really want to think about Illinois' position, I think the best way to look at it is the employment recovery or the lack thereof. Okay, so the first thing you should look at is Illinois relative to the U.S. and relative to the rest of the states in the region. So what this figure shows you is the percentage of jobs that have recovered since the end of the recession, okay, relative to the jobs that were lost. As you can see, Illinois has recovered 114.6% of the jobs that were lost during the recession. So we're back above where we were before we went into the recession. But as you can see, the U.S. average is 200.6%, all right? So we're way below the U.S. And if you look even our regional comparison, Iowa's at 213, and you know the worst state is Michigan at 132. Which is still significantly above us, all right? So we simply have not had anywhere near the job recovery that even the region has had, nor has the U.S. had. Now, if you want to drill a little bit deeper, So this is, I always put a great economist slide in here because it's completely indecipherable to any of you in this room. So you just have to trust me when I say what's in these columns. So it's an economist trick. We always do one of these in any presentation. So the first column, if you could see it, is the number of jobs that were lost in Illinois during the Great Recession. All right. So if the top line is Illinois lost 344,000 jobs during the Great Recession. The second line is the number of jobs that have been recovered since the Great Recession. So we're during this long, protracted recovery, and we've recovered 394,000 jobs. So that gives you your 114% recovery rate. And then it's the same columns for the U.S. on a relative basis. If you look at Illinois, there's three sectors that are bolded. The first is finance, insurance, and real estate. The second is manufacturing, and the third is professional and business services. Those are three sectors of of Illinois' economy where we have a heavier concentration of economic activity than the U.S. average. So these are more significant industries to Illinois than they are to the rest of the country in terms of their growth. Now, the bad news part of this is while some of them have done pretty well in terms of recovery, they're still performing well under in terms of what the U.S. average. So professional and business services is incredibly important to the Chicago metropolitan area. As you can see, the good news story is we've recovered 180% of the jobs in professional and business services. The bad news is, as you can see, the U.S. average is 255, all right? So we're well below in terms of where that performance is. If you look at others like manufacturing, we're actually still losing jobs at this point in manufacturing. We haven't recovered any of the jobs in that sector, where the U.S. as a whole has recovered about 32% of the jobs in that area. And finance, insurance, and real estate, again, our performance is well off the mark. We're at about 46% recovery versus 126% for the U.S. So if you look at the news, is obviously the reason why all of those recovery rates are in red is suggests that Illinois has performed below the U.S. average in every one of these industrial sectors. So we've had a very, very sort of sluggish and poor recovery. Now, the only bright part of this story is that if you looked at this figure 2 years ago, it would have looked a whole lot worse. Believe it or not, what we've seen recently is significant momentum in terms of Illinois, both in adding jobs and particularly adding jobs in key sectors. So we're starting to move in the right direction. So there's momentum is sort of moving in the right way. So hopefully if I come back from a year from now, these numbers will look a little bit closer in terms of where the performance is. So this, of course, leads to what in many cases people think of as kind of like the elephant in the room. So when they look at things like this, they say, well, why has Illinois performed so much worse than other states within the region even? And some have suggested that maybe this is because of fiscal conditions, that we've created an environment where it's harder to make investments in Illinois because of fiscal uncertainty going forward. And so I want to conclude just by talking about sort of like what the dimensions of the fiscal problem are and sort of what it would take to probably sort of, actually solve that problem going forward. The first is that, unfortunately, it hasn't gone unnoticed that the state hasn't had a full year budget for 2 years. At this point, our credit rating continues to get pummeled. We have the worst credit rating of the state in the country. We continue to have a negative outlook among most of our credit raters at this point. This all leads to significantly higher borrowing costs, depending on what day of the week you're looking at. Illinois has to pay about 160 basis points above a AAA rated credit when it goes to market. So even though we can borrow, we're borrowing at a significantly higher cost than we probably should be. And the debt is really goes beyond just the pension issue. Pensions get a lot of the attention. The problem is we've actually been running a structural budget deficit since 2001. So since 2001, we essentially have consistently spent more than we take in. And that obviously exacerbates just sort of the current account, not even looking at things like pensions or other future liabilities. Last December, the Institute for Government and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois did a really interesting report, which really highlighted sort of what the complexity of the situation was and what it might take to look at it. So they sort of did like a back of the envelope kind of a calculation and said, if you wanted to get to zero, all right, if you wanted to actually close this within a decade, what would it take for us to do that? So the first thing this study did was they had this great Will Rogers quote, which is, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging, was their first thing. The second thing is they looked at an all funds budget. So what they're looking at is all spending for the state of Illinois, not just the general fund spending. So it's a comprehensive measure of exactly what the state takes in and what it spends on. They estimated that in 2017 we'd have a deficit of $13 billion. That's just in the government account. That's not on the pension side. And again, that the structural budget deficit has really been running for 16 years at this point that we've had it. They project legacy liabilities, which are mostly pensions, are about $174 billion at this point. And we have unpaid bills of $10 billion. Of course, that figure's gone up since they estimated this. As currently is just sort of, what we owe, in many cases, just our vendors within the state, particularly health insurance and healthcare providers. So the question they asked is, could you solve this problem in 10 years? What would be the various sort of policy levers that might be available? So these are the options they came up with, and I think you'll agree none of them look particularly attractive. The first is you do a spending cut of 2% for all discretionary spending for each year for 10 years. That reduces the gap by about 32%. The second would you do an income tax rate hike, 475 for personal, 665 for corporate. That get you about 40% reduction in the gap. You expand the income tax base by 10%, mostly by taxing services. Illinois is very light in taxing services. We tax about 1920 services. By comparison, Iowa taxes about 130. So the idea is you could expand that and probably not have significantly bad economic outcomes from that. Another is expand the income tax by 10%. This would be by taxing retiree income above a certain threshold, $50,000. Illinois is one of only, I believe, 4 states that has a state income tax that does not tax retiree income. So it's an outlier in terms of that behavior. And then another issue would be the increase the sales tax base by 15%, again by taxing services. And then through all this, you get faster supply side growth. You essentially get a pickup in personal income growth by about 0.5%, and that would sort of, again, help sort of close this gap. So the bad news is if you look at all of these as being fairly unattractive measures, to actually affect the budget, to get us to zero in 10 years, guess what? You have to do all of them, all right? You can't pick or choose any of them, and you have to do them for an entire decade. So the issue going forward is really what you look at this is this notion for having some sort of a binding plan going forward. So to get to zero, what you have to do is essentially have everybody agree to stay on this fiscal path for a 10-year period of time and not deviate, regardless of who's in office or who's changed office or whatever else. So again, it could be managed, but again, it's more of a political issue than it is necessarily knowing what the economics are behind it. So that's a pretty daunting kind of perspective. So lastly, what's the risks for local government in this kind of environment? Well, the first is contagion. Public finance economists have noted that when a state is in bad condition, it raises borrowing costs really for every municipality in the state, regardless of how well managed you are. The reason why is because there's an assumption that the state will try to shift expenses onto localities, that they will reduce support for localities, or they will somehow impede your tax base. So the idea is every municipality has a certain risk from whatever procedure the state uses for fixing its own problem. The other issue could be something like a property tax freeze. Again, in the absence of any sort of government relief from either the federal government or the state government, managing a property tax freeze can occur if you have sufficient surplus or significant excess revenues at this point, but it'd be very, very difficult if you're not in that situation, if you have a very tight budget situation right now. So that could all lead to a lot of uncertainty and, again, sort of issues that municipalities would have to face regardless of how well managed they are. The last thing I want to say is just, when you think about it, this is not a situation where all hope is lost. So about a month ago, we held a conference at the Fed where what we did was we looked at Chicago specifically, and what we looked at was, would bankruptcy be a good option for Chicago? And what's the implication for that on economic growth within the region? And what we heard almost uniformly from business people is that in the current calculations they're making, Chicago region, most of Illinois is still an incredibly desirable place for investment because we have better infrastructure, we have better market access, we have better access to talent. Many of these things outweigh any sort of fiscal concerns that many of the companies have. However, it's becoming harder and harder for them to ignore the fiscal side of the equation. What they're looking for is some sort of certainty that the problem is going to be managed and to know what that's going to look like going forward so they can plan against it. So what they're saying at this point is they're saying, it's not surprising at this point that if you go into downtown Chicago, there's a record amount of investment occurring, particularly of large businesses that are moving into the city, because they're saying that for market access and access to talent, it's the best place in the Midwest to be. The problem is they're saying that they would like to see some sort of a commitment to solving the fiscal problem, or this is going to make it harder for them to sustain this level of investment going forward. So I think one of the things, and the takeaway, and why I always enjoy coming to this is, particularly with Tinley Park, is essentially, as best I can see, you guys do all the right things, right? Which is you set up all the conditions to make yourself the most favorable place for doing investment relative to what the conditions are around you. You can't change the state's condition, but what you can do is make yourself the most attractive place for those businesses who are passionately interested in being in this market. And so it seems like you guys always do a great job at sort of positioning yourself in terms of that. So with that, that's my, my talk. Thank you for your time and attention, and I appreciate being here.
Again, I wish to thank again Mr. Mattoon for his insights. I think his last slide should have a shooting star across it, like the old PSA announcements, the more you know. But we appreciate your time, but we did want to leave you with one parting thought, Mr. Walsh.
So for anybody who knows me, I'm always a glass half full. A little bit more of an optimist than a pessimist to a certain extent. So every market, every economy, every family, everybody's got challenges that they're dealing with. So there's always an opportunity regardless of what you're looking at. Tinley Park is obviously doing much better than most other communities out there because of the people we have in this room and everybody who works together. So one thing I'd like to just kind of leave with, it's from Warren Buffett's shareholder letter in 2016, which I think speaks exactly to what we've heard today from Jake and from Rick, which is for 240 years, it's been a terrible mistake to bet against America. And now is no time to start. America's golden goose of commerce and innovation will continue to lay more and larger eggs. So as we continue, to grow as a community, as business owners, let's continue to be progressive and innovative and control our own destiny. So thank you all for coming, and have a good rest of the day.